Hello and welcome to the Streams of Winter. I'm Yolkboy and we are Radio Westeros. Thanks so much for tuning into our live stream this afternoon. I'm very excited to be talking today about a character who we really don't know much about in the Winds of Winter due to the show excluding her altogether. It's Lady Stoneheart, everyone. Are there any remnants of Catelyn Stark in Lady Stoneheart? Is she a vengeful zombie or is she misunderstood? And what will she be up to in the upcoming novel? To help me answer these questions and more, here's the other half of Radio Westeros, Lady Gwyn.
Hello. Hey, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Welcome back to the live streams. Very excited to be talking about Lady Stoneheart and a little bit of Catelyn Stark, who happens to be one of my favorite characters. And as well, I know that she is a favorite of today's guest, who we are very happy to welcome back to the show. Joe Buckley, thank you for being here with us.
Hi guys, thanks for having me back again. Honor in general, anyway, but especially for this subject, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, really glad you could come back for this one. We had you at the beginning of our Riverlands conversation, talking about the prologue a few weeks ago, or maybe more than a few weeks actually. But your book ending our Riverlands live streams, because we know this is a favorite topic of yours, as it is of mine. So
very much.
Yeah, very good. Very glad you're here. So quick reminder to everyone about spoilers. We're talking about the books, sample chapters, maybe not so much here today, but also be making comparisons with the TV show. Not really many comparisons to make today, but we will mention the TV show. So basically, spoilers everything. So time to get started with Lady Stoneheart. Over to you, Yolkboy.
Okay, let's get on with Lady Stoneheart. Such an exciting character to think about for us all. So let's go back to Catelyn, shall we? Let's go back to the beginning. Catelyn Stark is the mother of the Stark kids, and in a Game of Thrones, she finds herself in the middle of serious conflict, and really she's a woman in a man's world. Can you tell me, both of you, what you enjoy about Catelyn's character during those increasingly desperate times in Westeros? And we'll start with you, Joe.
Oh, I think you're kicking off with the most frustrating question of the day. I know I'm going to be in 10 minutes thinking of 10 more things I should have said. I've made no secret of Catelyn being my favorite character, my favorite POV in general in the entire series. She's the one whose emotions and actions I feel most connected to. Her worldview, her priorities really seem to hit a specific point with me. I basically respond to her the most. Her bravery, her spirit, her love for her family and all she tries to do for them. I love that she will not just allow the world to sweep her and them up. She fights, she claws. She's very wise in terms of her protective nature and kind of a cooler head in this time of growing war where everyone's kind of forgotten how bad that actually is. And she's saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. And I actually just really enjoy the storylines we get, the kind of things she gets to see, the Riverlands in the opening act of the war and everything we see with Rob. That's really kind of my favorite stuff to look at. And she's kind of just unique as a POV. She's the only woman we get in her age bracket, the only mother, save for Cersei, who's a bit too big of a nutcase to really compare to. So she's kind of out of it. So she has to shoulder that load narratively. And she's also the introduction to a lot of this world and how it's set up politically. She's the sharp one, the knowledgeable one, and she's brilliant on that end. And she's also the window into not just one loving family at Winterfell, but another, at least the memory of another at Riverrun and the Tullys. So we get two really special places, and no one else actually does that. Everyone else is very much just one family or no family. So I think we kind of take for granted that George has given us that and given us a mother as a main character. It has been done before, but now it's done so much more, and George is part of that. So although I've not done justice to how much I love her, that's kind of my reasoning.
Well, I agree with everything you said. You really nailed it. Personally, for me, she's the most relatable character. When I started reading the books, we were the same age. Sadly, I've gotten older. She hasn't, but really her inner conflicts and her motivations were all so real and normal. Everything from her protective instincts around her children, which in all honesty, actually includes her attitude towards Jon. I think her comments to Robb about the Blackfires really reveals this kind of deep-seated anxiety that she has about the conflict that could come between them or their descendants later in life. So from that to this feeling that she always has, like she's not doing enough for all of her kids. Like if you are doing something for one, you're somehow leaving out the other. And I think there's not a mother on this earth who has multiple children who can't relate to that. She's just so intelligent. She has great instincts. And as a point of view on the war, she's absolutely fantastic. What a bold choice by George, really, to show us this enormous, sprawling military conflict through the eyes of the mom of the story. For me, she's perfect for it. When she threatens to knock Stannis and Renly's heads together, I really feel that. When she makes mistakes, she owns them, and she keeps on going in spite of it all, because that's what the situation and her son requires. So really, I can't say enough. Like you, I haven't done justice to it, but that's just a few of the reasons why she's absolutely one of my favorite characters.
And thanks to both of you for those emotive responses, and that really reflects on the character very well, I think. So we get this great character in Catelyn, and sometimes George likes to foreshadow and hint at future plots or events. So I was wondering if there's any amount of Lady Stoneheart foreshadowing when we're seeing Catelyn. And I'll take this, guys. In the Game of Thrones, Arya and Jon Snow are talking about a coat of arms. Jon jokes that Arya should wed Stark to Tully in her arms, and Arya replies, "A wolf with a fish in its mouth. It made her laugh. That would look silly." So a wolf with a fish in its mouth. Keep in mind that later Arya drags her mother from the river. We see there's a literal wolf with a fish in its mouth. So that's very interesting, I think. And next, and still in the Game of Thrones, Catelyn finds it hard to weep for men that have died protecting her from the mountain clans. It says sometimes she felt as though her heart had turned to stone. And this, I think, is a clear reference to Lady Stoneheart. Then in Clash, we have Catelyn thinking that her reflection in Renly's green-tinted armor makes her seem as though she's drowned. It says, beside the entrance, the king's armor stood sentry, a suit of forest green plate, its fittings chased with gold, the helm crowned by a great rack of golden antlers. The steel was polished to such a high sheen that she could see her reflection in the breastplate, gazing back at her as if from the bottom of a deep green pond. The face of a drowned woman, Catelyn thought. Can you drown in grief? Wow, that hits me, that one. And finally, we have the Ghost of Highheart with her rather unusual and strange prophecies. She gives the Brotherhood without banners this tidbit. I dreamt of a roaring river and a woman that was a fish. Dead she drifted with red tears on her cheeks. But when her eyes did open, oh, I woke from terror. So various foreshadowing going on. I've said 4 instances. There might be more if you scour the text. But to me, this shows that Lady Stoneheart was always part of the plan for Catelyn in George's mind. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I think you're dead on there. Like you say, you've just had. I don't have the skill that you guys do for looking back and finding these references. You've done a great job there. But even without actual evidence from the text, I think just the feel of it, just the feel of early Catelyn, the spirit we get essentially right away when she fights for Bran with the cat's paw. That's kind of her first action, really, that you can really remember from the series. And it's that extra going the extra mile rather. Not only for that, but when it comes to this investigation into the knife and in the war, she doesn't just sit at Winterfell. She's going to go out and do something. And to be fair, she's not completely pacifist when it comes to thinking of their enemies as well. So I just think right from the introduction, we do get this capacity for being proactive, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, she might be a vengeful revenant, but her motivation still always centers around her children. And it's not just about vengeance. She still wants to find her daughters and presumably keep them safe. So it's not exactly textual foreshadowing, but I think it's pretty plain that Lady Stoneheart is a kind of distilled, concentrated version of Catelyn Stark's emotions and motivations, something we'll be discussing later on, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Catelyn versus Stoneheart, will definitely investigate that further. So Catelyn tries to stay by Rob's side as much as possible to protect her son from the inherent dangers of leading as a king during wartime. Yet at the wedding of Edmure and Roslyn, alarm bells were going off as we see the chapter through her point of view. So what were those warning signs, and to what extent is what comes next Catelyn's fault, Joe?
Well, firstly, let me just give a tip of the hat to you, because I remember listening to your specific episode on this specific chapter a few years ago, and it blew my mind. It really gave me a different reframing of it. That was probably after my first read, so this took me right back to listening to that for these notes. Personally, I would balk at calling any of it her fault, unless we want to go really wide and look back to her taking Tyrion on the road, etc., etc. But by that measure, everything is everyone's fault, so I won't do that. During the wedding ceremony itself, or I guess the feast afterwards, she's definitely wrapped up in her duty as a sister and a mother and a Tully. She's being political there, and we can see her kind of political and observational skills are still as sharp as ever. It's just that no one would have this in their mind. It's not a thing you need to worry about because it never ever happens. Of course no one would ever do that. It's just outside the realm of possibility, and people are acting like they are supposed to be doing. Edmure is being like any groom would be. She even compares herself to Roslyn when she's looking at her, so she doesn't think there's anything completely amiss there. And she has every reason to think that Rob is safe with his guards around him and sword belts are on the wall, and he's got a bloody army outside, so nothing's going to happen, are they? They've got more important things to think about in that moment. But to be fair, she does actually start to suss, and when everything does go down, she does click pretty quickly. I think if she was to do it all again, if she had a copy of A Storm of Swords and knew what was coming, the only thing she'd actually really be able to change is probably just take the opportunity to dance with Rob, because she turns it down, and that's one of the harder parts to read for me, that you could have had this last dance before everything bad happened, but unfortunately you did not. Hindsight, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that. Look, people have to own their actions in fiction, just like in real life, right? I don't think that not doing that is a charge that you can really lay at Catelyn Stores, because she feels her flaws very deeply. And really, as the Red Wedding progresses from their journey up there, when they arrive and everything, she knows something is amiss. She can feel it. She's got all these kind of like niggling feelings. Alarm bell number 25, I don't know, whatever number, is Grey Wind's odd behavior. She really knows the protective value of the direwolves from the Bran, Summer, and Catspaw situation, and what's going on with Grey Wind from the time Rob gets back from the West has been making her uneasy. So that's been going on for a long time. That's just one thing that kind of strikes her as odd. She's got great instincts, so you said that, but the fact of the matter is that for some time she's been suppressing those instincts. Number one, because the men in her family have made her feel like she's exaggerating or overreacting. Maybe, in real life, I'd say that's this insidious accusation of the patriarchy, saying to a woman, you're over emotional, you're hysterical. So she's dealing with that. And Robb has been holding her at arm's length as he navigates being a king. This is really perfectly normal also and relatable for a 16-year-old young man and his mother. So the real tragedy, I think, is that in A Storm of Swords, she allowed herself to be marginalized as far as Robb's decision-making goes, which led to him making his own errors in judgment. And we could point to some of those. And I saw someone in the chat pointing out Robb not listening to his mother and sending Theon to Pike. Big mistake on his part in a situation where Cat absolutely nailed that correct decision that should have been made. So could she have been more assertive and really put her foot down and said, Robb, you really have to listen to me? Maybe, but she was consciously making an effort to let Robb grow and be his own man, which represents a very real struggle in the life of any mother and their young adult child, especially mothers and sons. It's very important at that age, especially if your son happens to be a king. You kind of have to let him go and do his own thing.
Yeah, I think you're dead on there. Really, the whole table is kind of set by the end of Clash, and Storm is, for her and Robb to a certain degree, just kind of, I used to call it the death slide when I was going through these chapters. They get on it at the top, and there's really no getting off by this point anyway.
Excellent. Yeah, slippery slope towards doom. And the Red Wedding was a traumatic read and was such a significant event that it seemed to even signify the end of a literary act. This is where we witnessed the horrific death of Catelyn. But what I want to know is, did she become Lady Stoneheart before she died, or was she shaped by her subsequent resurrection? What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I think, like you say, emotional read is one way to put it. Even, I don't know what read I'm on now, 7th or 8th, but I think everyone, when they have to reread that chapter, they always have to put the book down, have a bit of a sit down, take a breath of fresh air, because it's still very, very weighty. And like we said, the capacity has always been there in wanting to fight and take revenge, and we see that even before her death. She slaps Edwin, she runs towards Robb, then she crawls towards Robb, then she grabs a knife. She'll do anything she can. But in the specific moment of her death, or just before, she thinks she's lost everything. Robb, her other children, Ned, probably her brother and home too. That's in the back of her mind somewhere, I'm sure. So everything she's worked so hard to protect, like Lady Gwen just said, has not gone well. She's failed, basically. So all that's left is vengeance, hence what she does to Jingle Bell, which is a pretty good sign of what's to come in terms of innocence. But it's also complex, as she kills him as part of keeping her word and honor. She says, if you don't let Robb go, I'm going to do this. Mordefrey does it anyway. So, okay, you might break your word, but I won't. Which kind of flies against the themes we get in Feast, which I'm sure we'll come on to later. But yes, I would say an element of Stoneheart exists in those split seconds before or during death. She would take more vengeance if she had the opportunity. She would pay the Freys with their own coin, so to speak. But also actually being resurrected does play into that, because it creates this mindset of there are no rules. Death has nothing waiting for us. I'm not going to go to a bad place. As far as we know, they haven't given any indication of that. So I can go around doing whatever I want. Doesn't matter if I murder people or lie or break guest right. There's just darkness on the other side. I don't know how much George is going to go into that side of things, and we might have that argument about John as well, but it definitely is worth thinking about. Either way, I think it's brilliant structuring from George and just creation from George to have this life-affirming anti-war person who's trying to keep everyone alive for 3 books, then turn into the ultimate sign of pure violence and loathing, no matter what consequences she brings.
You're muted, Lady Gwen.
Sorry. Went to do something for the cats. So as we've said so often, the vengeance across the Song of Ice and Fire isn't without consequence. It's just a huge theme, and it's getting bigger and bigger as we move into the Winds of Winter. We expect it to be one of the main themes of the Winds of Winter. But the unbridled vengeance of Lady Stoneheart and her Brotherhood without banners is something else too. It blends the theme of broken men and women, with vengeance, and with, as you said, lack of rules, really the freedom to give free rein to your darkest impulses, which is what Catelyn did in that final moment of her life. But oddly enough, she was also keeping her word in that moment, and vows and promises are going to be another huge theme in the Stoneheart arc, specifically in the Winds of Winter.
Yeah, agreed. So, at the end of A Storm of Swords, during the Merit Frey epilogue, this is when we first set eyes on Lady Stoneheart. During your first read, I want to know if you can take yourself back to when you were turning those pages. What were your reactions to this plot revelation? Did it immediately seem very exciting, or did it feel sort of unnecessary, or something else entirely? What do you think, Joe?
I think to call it a surprise doesn't even come close to doing it justice. I would call it the biggest blindsider in the entire series. I think only Ned and Jon's deaths come close, and I think they are actually not even close themselves, to be honest. No one sensed Catelyn would actually come back to life after just being involved in like you say, a kind of genre-defining literature highlight. Everyone knows this moment, but thanks to the TV show as well. But even just in the books, everyone knows about this major thing that happens. And we feel the emotional weight of that event, at least I do, definitely. So to discover that someone we love is actually still here from it and has kind of escaped that terrible ending, that really sad ending to a really sad arc, it sounds brilliant. It sounds like George has granted us the ultimate wish. So yeah, when I read it, I was definitely very excited, not just because I love Catelyn in general, but just the quick turnaround. But then we actually get a look at her face and we see what's been done, what she's doing now, and what this wish actually looks like. Well, that's kind of ultimate George, isn't it? And it's obviously built on a lot during Feast of just kind of turning things around on us. And I asked at the time when we were going through this on Scraps and Scrolls whether George could have got away with not having this reveal here at the end of Storm and actually delaying it to Feast, because we just had this big moment with Sansa and Peter Baelish's reveals, which could have been a perfectly fine ending to that book. I think we will agree. But everyone said, no, we like it here in the epilogue. And I would have to agree. Like I say, it is a massive carpet pull from George. One of the very worst moments of the series, or in many series of books, like I say, in which we lose not one but two of our favorite characters. That event is so dire. It happens almost halfway through the book, but even at the end, after a relatively kind of like good end to the book in terms of Tywin dies and Dany does conquer Marine and Jon becomes Lord Commander, they're all kind of good things, but it doesn't feel that good because we've still got this like rotten taste from what's happened nearly, I don't know, half the book beforehand. And we get this one thing that no one would have dared hope for, that one of those characters did come back, only to make us discover what that actually means. And it's not so pretty. It's incredible writing.
Mm-hmm. Truly. I mean, I'd love to say that I saw it coming, that Arya's dream of Nymeria dragging Kat's body ashore, and then you see through Nymeria's eyes Beric, Thoros, and Lem riding up. It at least hinted that maybe, just maybe, some of Thoros's magic might be called upon, but I didn't. I was stunned, and have to admit, like you, I was happy to know that she was back, and some phrase, we're paying the price, because that's all I wanted. Well, George does love to stir that bloodthirstiness up in all of us, doesn't he? Only to turn around and show us how ugly those impulses actually are, because then we see her through Brienne's eyes in A Feast for Crows. Brienne, who really knew her, the first person that we know that knew her, that sees her actually as she has become. And that is so incredibly tragic and heartbreaking and horrifying. And I think it really wouldn't have worked if that was the reveal. So kudos to George for getting it just right, for giving us the knowledge of what had happened to her, and then the space to sort of absorb that horror through Brienne's eyes.
And I was I felt torn. Like, it was a great surprise, as you guys have outlined. But I remember the first time I read it, I was like, isn't this a bit cheap? But of course, when I was able to reflect on it, I thought, well, actually, there's been resurrection since the prologue, so it shouldn't have been a surprise, you know. And then you get to dance, and you're thinking it's going to happen to John. So it was perhaps not as out of the left field as you first thought, but it's something that I've grown to, you know, love, and I'm very excited for the Winds of Winter for this. And maybe part of that is because HBO, for whatever reason, omitted Lady Stoneheart, so it makes it so exciting because you haven't been given any clues about the plot points. So zero. We've got no leads. Nothing's formed where her plot's going to go in my mind. So it's like an open field for me. So in that respect, it is one of the most exciting things about the Winds of Winter. And to stay on the subject of the epilogue, what could be gleaned about Lady Stoneheart from that chapter? What did this bit of writing tell us about Lady Stoneheart, Joe?
I think the main thing to take away from it is we get this foreshadowing for the breaking or abuse of guest right that we see in Brienne 7 and Brienne 8 in Feast. When Merritt says, hey, this kind of thing is not allowed, Lem just tells him, well, we have a rope and that's all we need to do it. So you get this whole can of worms opening about basically who holds the bigger stick and if we're obeying any rules at all anymore. While Thomas Evans, he just said straight up, oh, yeah, we lied. We know we said we would keep you safe, but we're not going to do that. So it's a huge signal that honor and truth and kind of parlay and like safe passage, they've all been abandoned straight away, which is important given how much focus fair trial was given during those Arya Brotherhood chapters during Storm. So yeah, like I said, it just sets up this big conundrum during Feast, and it's kind of Stoneheart being willing to unleash the true nature and pushing this broken man theme that we also got a lot from Brienne. So I think straight away you can see this isn't Catelyn that's come back, because she was quite high on a lot of those things when she was alive.
Indeed, and boy, wow, is that broken man thing going to be huge in Feast, right? So right here, we get the first indication that these guys, this Brotherhood without banners, that we gotten to know through Arya's point of view, have changed. There's a real feeling of there's something different here. We don't really understand what it is yet. We don't get the full impact of it until later on in Feast, and it's built up slowly at that. But the Merritt epilogue told us two basic facts. Catelyn Stark is alive, and she's pissed. And we're left to wonder what comes next. And the reveal of that really doesn't happen until the very end of A Feast for Crows. So we get a whole book of kind of wondering what's coming of this. You know, what is going to be the actual impact on the narrative.
Okay, so I want to get back to something that we touched upon earlier, but it's just too juicy not to discuss. Catelyn was, for the most part, caring, kind, and compassionate, whereas Stoneheart is presented as this kind of vengeful, hate-driven revenant. So our patron Christine wonders how much of Catelyn there is residing in Stoneheart, given this disparity between the two characters. Have I got this right, Lady Gwyn? Is there a bit of disparity? What do you think?
Well, yes, obviously there is, but obviously also all of her memories remain. She knows about her children. She knows about the phrase in the wedding and the vows Brienne and Jaime swore to her. She wants to find her remaining children, possibly more than she wants to kill Freys.
Yeah, I think you're dead on there. I'm going to kind of combine this question with the last one you asked, Joke Boy, about why we have this epilogue, because it's a quick line, but the Brotherhood do ask Merritt about Sandor again and Arya, like you say, Lady Gwen. So we know that Stoneheart knows that Arya's alive and that she's looking for her, and she might even know by now that Arya was mere feet away from her, the twins. Although I'm not sure how, but either way, it'd be very tough to hear. But it's really key because we know straight off that this isn't just a mindless vengeance machine that's been given back to us. Catelyn is in there there is something in the world that she wants other than death and murder. There is something that would add some kind of positive meaning to her. Even in the shell of a horror monster, she does have the capacity for something to make her happy or something to love. And I think the other part of it is just, like I kind of hinted at earlier, it's just the opening of avenues for healing. Like I said, she was the person with the most tragic end possible. She thought all her children were dead, and even when they're not, well, apart from Rob, and she might actually get a second chance and wipe all that away with something happy. What if she hears that Bran and Rickon are actually alive as well? What if she actually gets to reunite with Arya or Sansa or all of them? How incredible would that chance be to see? Hence why it is placed at the end of Storm. I think it is actually, even though it's a very dark chapter of someone being lied to and then hanged, it is actually quite exciting way to finish this massive book of just the possibility, especially for us Catelyn fans. But then again, it's double-edged, as it always is with George, because we have to play that off against the quality of life she actually has. Yes, there's the possibility of these amazing things happening, but then actually look at her, because it's not a Disney film. It's not kind of lights whizzing around her and then the Catelyn we knew before is back nice and whole and everyone's happy with it. She's brought back her scars with her, like Beric, and except she's got physical ones as well. So she's got constant reminders of this great crime and of her losing her own mind and her own grisly murder. So it's nothing easy with George. It's nothing one-sided. So we just have to constantly ask ourselves over and over again, is this a quality of life? Because we've had from Beric through Arya's eyes, he's described the experience to us and it's not nice. So do we even want that for our favorite character? Do we want the possibility of reuniting with her children, or do we not want her to have to experience this? It's always George just making us have all these questions. We can never have everything easy. Thank you, George.
Yeah, thank you, George. I think one more thing worth pointing out is all those kids at the inn at the crossroads, orphans and foundlings, mostly collected by the Brotherhood, taken in by them, probably somewhere in their search for Arya. Neither the Brotherhood nor Stoneheart simply choose to leave these children who aren't the one that they're looking for, which they certainly could have done. That they've proven themselves to have become very different than the group of people they were when they took Arya and her companions in. So, they could have just let these kids go on and be wandering the Riverlands, but they didn't. Our patron Fabulous wonders if that indicates a spark of compassion, and I would say emphatically, yes, on some level at least. Cat may have ended her life with these feelings of hate and pain and despair and vengeance all topmost in her mind, but those feelings were inspired by a deep love that she had for her family and specifically her children, and that's something that we really shouldn't forget.
So is that a sign that she might be a little more than a revenge-fueled zombie? Could there be other indicators of that? And will there be any kind of nuance to her character? Or is she going to be an all-out monster, Joe?
Monster might be applicable, but more in an overall sense. If you're reading back through the histories, or you are nowhere near the Riverlands and you don't know or care about Catelyn and her children, then yeah, sure, you might end up describing her as a monster, especially if you're afraid, and then they probably call her a monster. But she has obviously retained her wits enough to make decisions. She's thinking things over. She thinks tactically. She's still leading this huge group of kind of like guerrilla warfare soldiers, etc. She's not just shuffling from place to place, hunting down stragglers with her arms stretched out. She is a leader, and we see that in Brienne 8. We can see her weighing up different options and considering things, what to do with Brienne. I'm not sure how many actual human elements of living she's lost in terms of food and sleep like Beric did. It's often brought up that she's only died once, not the 6 times like Beric, but then she's also been dead a lot longer, so George maybe has that shortcut to kind of make them a little more similar. But she's definitely more fueled than Beric, I would say, anyway.
Yes, and not only that, but I am personally quite curious about that trip she took into Hagsmire and the Neck. That's where Robb signed his will, and he sent emissaries Galbert Glover and Mage Mormont to represent him, to Alan Reed. They're still alive. Is she somehow seeking a way to carry on Rob's legacy? And looking for her girls is an obvious thing, at least on reread, but this is something a little more subtle and has yet to be expanded upon. It's probably one of the things I most want to see in the Winds of Winter. Does she have an actual plan beyond hanging Freys?
I think hold that thought because we've got more coming up. So Lady Stoneheart was resurrected by Beric, and she now fronts the BWB. In effect, what can we say about the relationship between Lady Stoneheart and the BWB? Given that the BWB began as a sort of merry band of Robin Hood-esque outlaws, and are they really fitted together well at this stage? What do you think, Joe?
Stoneheart and the Brotherhood, they're something I've been talking / thinking about a lot lately because we've just finished Feast for Scraps and Skulls and Valor Aridis. I think it was a genuine question early in Storm, for me it was anyway, exactly why we got so many chapters with the Brotherhood through Arya's eyes. There's loads in the first half of that book, especially when they end up just disappearing halfway through when she gets kidnapped by the Hound. But it's because we need to see the comparison between the plucky lads out to do the good work in the name of the small folk and protect all the people. As you say, a merry band. We see them over and over again. Now we compare it with what we actually find a little bit in the epilogue of Storm and then completely in Brienne 8. And it really hits home that this isn't a plucky group anymore. This is a dark, corrupted group who have either been allowed to indulge the worst parts of themselves in someone like Lem, or have been just kind of dragged along for the ride because nihilism seems to be the word of the day, like a Jane Heddle or even a Thoros. It's really striking and really quite moving. Lem and Thoros, I think, are the two you really need to look at in that chapter. There's kind of Thoros's disenfranchisement with everything that's going on versus kind of Lem's corruption. And let me add this in about Lem. Let's recall he was one of the ones who really didn't want to think about Beric being resurrected, and he kind of just put his head in the sand rather and just got on with it. That's a lot harder to do with Catelyn or Stoneheart, and that might have kicked off this change because we find out in that Brienne chapter that he had a wife and daughter who were killed, and how bitter must it be for someone who's lost people that recently to see that people can come back, but not his people, someone else. So it just makes him even more bitter about the whole thing. It makes him probably feel like he's just being played with by the gods, that he doesn't matter at all. It's a little bit reminiscent of Arya asking for us about who can come back and how and whatever else. But in terms of him in this chapter and going forward with Stoneheart Brotherhood, he's let his cloak go sodden because Beric could at least channel his anger and hurt into something good for the world, whereas Stoneheart doesn't seem as bothered about that. She just lets it go unchecked. So it's that precise vengeance versus justice argument, and what's the difference? It's almost as if the leadership and the atmosphere it creates can have a really positive or negative effect on a group of people, a little bit like our respective countries are going through at the moment.
Yes, indeed. I think we can all see the truth of that. One of my favorite quotes from Feast actually attests exactly to this divide. It's Thoros saying to Brienne, "Justice. I remember justice. It had a pleasant taste. Justice was what we were about when Beric led us, or so we told ourselves. We were king's men, knights and heroes. But some nights are dark and full of terror, my lady. War makes monsters of us all." So were they ever about justice, is what Thoros seems to be asking. This is such a philosophical question to me, and I just love to think about, all the things he's trying to get to the bottom of here. It's like he's probing this idea and finding that there's something slightly nasty hidden underneath it, which ties in really nicely to Sandor's speech about knights in A Storm of Swords in the Hollow Hill. How long can a human soul, whether it belongs to a knight or a freedom fighter or a mother or a little girl, withstand pain and violence and slaughter before it breaks beneath the strain? Deep philosophy.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting what I said earlier about them starting off as a kind of Robin Hood band of merry men, and now they're contemplating their own darkness. How did it happen? What was the point where they broke finally? Was it a slippery slope, or was it a single event that kind of pushed them over the edge? It's interesting to discuss. And we've talked a lot about the importance of vows in this situation with Stoneheart, Jaime, and Brienne that's going to kind of kick it all off in the Winds of Winter. Stoneheart and the BWB now have the pair captive, and she has misinterpreted Jaime's sending his regards offhand remark as being purposefully aimed at Robb during his death. The situation could not get any worse or intimidating for Jaime, but perhaps he does have those vows to protect him. My question is, why would Lady Stoneheart give value or credence to vows spoken when she was Catelyn Stark? Lady Gwyn?
I'm not really sure that she will place a lot of value on those vows, given that she has Bruce Bolton's words ringing in her ears, quite literally the last things she heard before she was murdered. I am quite sure that Jaime and Brienne, however, will make their case regarding the vows. And in the end, I think my feeling is that it's going to be Thoros who stands up and demands that they have to let the gods or God decide, much as they did for Sandor in A Storm of Swords. But I do think, because I think she has some capacity for thought, for rational thought, that Lady Stoneheart will understand that if Jaime's champion prevails in this trial, I'm sure he's going to have, that he'll be absolved, and she's going to have to, maybe not happily, but she's going to have to, let him move on, just like they did with Sandor in Storm of Swords.
Yeah, I think it's also worth remembering she's suffering through a kind of a double kick to the stomach, because she believes that Brienne, who was a trusted friend, at least Jaime is on the other side. At least he has kind of an excuse for breaking vows and turning cloak. But Brienne was supposed to be her friend. They shared something special together. So she's really not going to be in the mood for sticking to her end of the bargain if neither Jaime or Brienne are. It's just it's all too recent and too similar to what happened to Robb. So she's really not going to be in the mood for listening to that kind of argument. And something I spoke a little bit about earlier, that vows and rules just don't seem to mean much to her at all anymore. We get the hint in the epilogue, but we really find out about it in Feast, because okay, sure, she went back on a promise about ransom delivery, but that's not too big of a deal. But really, I don't think enough people talk about that Brienne 8 chapter, where we find out that the Brotherhood actively use guest right as not just something to abuse, but as a trap. They're actually saying, oh, come in, you can rest at the inn, and then in the morning they're hanging by a tree. And after 3 books of having it really hammered into us of how important this concept is to the basic goodness of people and the world and the fabric of society, and the fuss we've all made about the phrase breaking it, the Brotherhood now think it's fair game. And maybe that's an eye for an eye thing, and it's kind of like, well, you started it, we're just following you, or kind of like Pandora's box is opened. Whatever it is, it's definitely corruptive of the souls of the Brotherhood. Like I said, to a Jane Heddle, and Brienne even sees that straight off. She thinks this young girl, she's involved in all this thing, it doesn't even seem to affect her. So that's definitely not the Catelyn we knew. And most importantly to me, it's definitely not what Ned would want. This is his nightmare. This is the opposite of everything he taught his children. It's in the very first chapter of the series. This is how you deal with criminals and people who need to die. You do it this way. And this is the literal opposite. But then again, to apply to that, Ned never had to watch any of his children die in front of him. So he can't really talk up, can he? Who's to say what he would actually do if he had seen Sansa's head being taken off Arya, and what kind of rage his icy heart would actually let out. So what rules could we be willing to break if we were in Catelyn's position is a worthy question of asking.
Yes, it really is. I think that's a great point. The end of Ned's life proved that he was willing to go pretty far to save his children. So, I don't know. That's a little different from vengeance. He never really seemed to be much about vengeance as far as his brother or his sister or his father went. But at the end of the day, no man or woman can predict how he or they, anyone, would react to the situation that Catelyn found herself in, losing her children and everything, her husband, everything that meant anything to her, one by one. It's very hard to pass judgment on that because we haven't walked in those shoes.
Okay, so let's walk in Stoneheart's shoes for a minute and get rather dark on the theme of vengeance. So we all know what happened at the Red Wedding. It's a shared trauma that everyone in the fandom can relate to together. It's seared into our minds, given what happened at this Red Wedding, and that Stoneheart is out for revenge. Many fans believe we are building up towards a Red Wedding 2.0, as it's called. There's hints in A Feast for Crows that there could be an upcoming Frey Lannister marriage, and so the stage could be set for another monumental moment in the Winds of Winter. So do we think there will be a Red Wedding 2.0, or is this purely a fandom invention and maybe some kind of wishful thinking? And if so, how do we see this event playing out, Joe?
I think there will be something of that nature. I never know how to guess these things because George always seems to scupper me. But I've seen a lot of people suggest or think that it would be taking back Riverrun. That would definitely make sense. She would want Riverrun back. She would want it out of Frey hands. I want it out of Frey hands because I love Riverrun. So I'd like to see that. And last time I was here, we spoke about the Blackfish might be involved by then, and it could all be. That's definitely what he wants as well. You can go in and you can kill Emmon Frey, and Jenna is half Lannister and half Frey now, so that's two birds with one stone. But even then, it seems they weren't even that big a part of the Red Wedding. I could see this victory kind of being a bit hollow. It depends what happens to Edmure, really, because if they take the castle back and Edmure's already dead, or Brynden as well, then what are you actually going to do with it? Who are you going to leave it to? So I don't. She was really interested in keeping it herself. So I could see this being a kind of melancholy, empty victory where maybe you slaughter hundreds and thousands of Freys, but so what? Yeah, no, you don't get as much satisfaction as you might have wanted. And maybe that's what pushes her north, which I know we'll talk about later on. But you're right. The inclusion of a wedding would perhaps do the trick, because I can't see any other reason why they're going to gather, especially now that the snows and the winter are coming. So you can take out more of the guilty parties, at least. Not that Stoneheart is really a stickler on whether they're involved or not. She just wants to kill them because of their surname. But I feel personally it's more poetic justice to have the Freys take themselves out via this kind of ambitious civil war that we've got lots of hints of and seems to be brewing. That would be more fitting for their nature. But then does George actually have time for all of that to happen during the span of the books? So perhaps we'll get both, and he'll play both fields. We'll get a large contingent, maybe even Walder Frey himself, getting taken out at Riverrun, and then the rest left to collapse in on each other for our enjoyment.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me if somehow the Stoneheart gang continues to kind of cull the herd, leaving the way clear for House Frey to fall apart. Think about it. If you had a situation at Riverrun where it was a much smaller scale kind of thing, they're not going to have this gigantic wedding like the Red Wedding was. And it could just be a handful of people. Maybe Walder Frey comes down, maybe, brings the daughter for Davin Lannister to marry. And maybe there's really just that few number of Freys involved, but they managed to take them out, which without Walder, you've got yourself a good old-fashioned civil war that's going to occur. So I would love to see the phrase devoured from the inside out by this mistrust, fear, and division, which is exactly what Varys is trying to accomplish in King's Landing, as he says to Kevin in the epilogue of Dance with Dragons. So it would be a nice set of parallels if you had these two sets of baddies getting their comeuppance by just, sort of eating themselves from the inside out, which, come to think of it, is kind of similar to what might be playing out with the Boltons inside Winterfell. So maybe this is going to be a major theme across the board when it comes to Winds of Winter.
Okay, so Red Wedding 2.0, here's the Radio Westeros theory about what could go down. In a Game of Thrones, Catelyn imagined roasting Walder Frey on a spit. It was a rather curious thought that seemed to come out of nowhere. And remember, we talked earlier about the foreshadowing in A Game of Thrones, these kind of one-liners that kind of echo further into the story. So could this thought of roasting Walder Frey on a spit in fact be part of foreshadowing the Red Wedding 2.0? So, like I said, we've been theorizing this eventuality for years. I think there's a chance this could come to pass. It was a curious thing for her to think, and this idea makes even more sense when you consider that Catelyn's vengeance comes from Walder's breaking of guest right. That was what really upset her about seeing her son die and be taken advantage of in that way. And it was the breaking of guest right which really resonates, up north, and we've seen with the Frey pies. So we know that from the Rat Cook and the Frey pies that forced cannibalism is seen as an appropriate punishment in the north. Could this all be fitting together? Roasting Walder on a spit. So that's a funny thing to say. And then you think, well, could he be served up to people? Forced cannibalism? It all kind of, in my mind, fits together in a jigsaw sort of way. How this exactly would unfold, I do not know to be sure, but the Red Wedding 2.0 could make us disgusted with ourselves for craving vengeance in the first place once we see what Stoneheart is cooking.
Yeah, I've personally always been a little suspicious that Walder Frey will just die peacefully in the sleep, because George does have a cruel streak, and it would be like him to kind of give us the middle finger. But I think what you're saying, this does all really perfectly fit together, and it would be a really good opportunity for doing something that George loves doing, which is giving us exactly what we want and then making us feel really bad about it. We've seen it with Theon, with Cersei, even Joffrey to a certain extent. And
is
everyone
that what
definitely
you call
hates
bittersweet, Joe?
Yes, exactly. It's everyone hates Walder Frey, but if we actually ended up with this scene, maybe we just hear about it, but maybe we actually have to see it in an actual chapter. We have to see this 90-year-old man, or however he is, crying out in pain as he's slowly roasted. That's going to turn some stomachs, and definitely fits in with the anti-revenge message, and just makes us feel pretty bad about ourselves. And actually, it even fits in with this idea of Stoneheart drifting ever further away from what Ned would want, because this is basically a repeat of what happened to his father with Aerys. So definitely not playing into Ned's good books here.
So I wonder if this happens, or something similar, something to this effect, where Stoneheart just goes too far at the Red Wedding 2.0. Who would the POV be? It's an interesting question, especially if you're one of these people who think that Bren and Jaime could sort of go their own way after a trial or something, and if they're not in the picture, then you do have to kind of rack your brain how we could see it. Have you got any ideas, Joe?
Well, like you say, you just don't know what's going on with Brienne and Jaime. That's definitely a kind of blank area on my mental map of wins, but she could definitely fit in this role, Brienne especially, because maybe it puts her in a bit of a Barristan situation where she's having to witness these things. She's not supposed to say anything and just kind of get on with it, but she does end up doing the right thing where Barristan didn't. Maybe she even pulls a Jon and puts Walder Frey out of his misery or something like that. Even Jaime would be an interesting choice for the exact same reason. He definitely doesn't like the phrase, and he can just witness a little bit more of what his father's left behind. So that they both fit, but I would say probably Brienne would fit better myself.
Well, we talked about this between ourselves, and you know, I started off thinking, well, Brienne, like you say, is the best. But if she's not around, and if Jaime's not around, I can't think of another POV. We know George isn't going to introduce any more, so that leaves us with an epilogue POV of Frey destruction. Given that we think this book is going to begin with a kind of loot train ransacking of Edmure's procession. What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Well, the more I think about that idea, I think it would be a great way to see it. You know, maybe Frey, daughter number 12 or grandson 32. We've already had a Frey epilogue, so I don't know, maybe not them, but whoever it is, having this event in an epilogue would allow for the development of the revenge arc and its consequences across the entire book. It would really, like you said, it would bookend the novel with similar scenes, while also allowing Jaime and Brienne to move away from that storyline if they hadn't done so already. So, you know, I like having the freedom to let them move out of the Riverlands sooner if that's what the story calls for. If it had to be either Jaime or Brienne, I mean, I could envision either one. I like some of the things that you were saying, Joe. My money would probably be on Brienne, and like you said, maybe she's doing something heroic or merciful. Would definitely fit the bill, I think. So we'll see.
So, however Lady Stoneheart's greater plan pans out, I think we can agree that there will be death and blood and carnage one way or the other. Stoneheart has little left to lose in her quest for revenge, but I wonder what you guys think the overall message regarding this grand theme of revenge will be. What's the ultimate feeling that George wants to give us about one person, you know, getting something over on someone that's wronged them, full stop? What do you think, Joe?
I think it's a major piece of the series overall, and I think the message that George wants to get across is that evil begets evil, revenge breeds revenge, and as well as being a really key part of Feast's message as a whole book, I think probably Ilaria Sand puts it best in her much underappreciated little mini speech during Dance, where she's saying that it just goes on forever and ever. More and more people suffer, and it doesn't end. It just corrupts everybody. We've seen that with Sandrock again. We've seen it with this literal representation in the face of the haggard face of Stoneheart, even Dany at times. And I think most people will agree it's Arya's main theme or purpose in the story, and really it just doesn't get you what you want. It's bad, basically. It's just bad. That's what he wants to get across. And again, that there's a difference between vengeance and justice. And I do think it's interesting that Ned is kind of the symbol of one, and now Catelyn is becoming the symbol of the other. So it's going to be really interesting to see how caught up in that kind of web the various Stark children get, and which one they lean more towards by the end of the series.
Yes, I think just in short, revenge equals loss of humanity eventually. That's going to be the message. And Stoneheart is the living embodiment of that concept. So we're going to see that whole thing play out in well, I don't know if she's living. I guess that's not the unliving embodiment. But yeah, it's definitely going to be, pretty powerful.
I think it will be powerful, and I think that power is going to reside in the fact that he's going to make us enjoy it quite a bit, but then is going to kind of pull the rug from under our feet and, hold up a mirror and say, this is what you're asking for, someone being eaten alive, or, some disgusting act of revenge, and, going from fist pumping to kind of, oh, maybe I shouldn't have enjoyed that. That wasn't really what I'm all about. So I think that's what he's going to toy with. So if Stoneheart does sate her desire for revenge against Freys and Lannisters, what do we think her character could then do? What if she achieves her goals, Lady Gwyn? What if we think of the future? What comes next? What if Walder Frey's dead and all the Freys are dead, and she has celebrated some heinous act and she's got what she wants? What's left for Lady Stoneheart?
I lost my place.
It's just a little bit ahead.
There it is. Sorry about that. I was just talking in the chat. Well, I want to say that what Lem tells Brienne, she wants her son alive, and she wants the men who killed him dead. Well, she can't have her son alive, so she is going to have to settle for the latter, right? She wants to feed the crows like they did at the Red Wedding. Freys and Bolton's eye will give her those as many as she likes. All she asks of you is Jaime Lannister. So she's going to get Freys in the Riverlands, but she's not going to get any Boltons in the Riverlands. She wants Boltons. She saw Roose Bolton stab her son through the heart. She wants him. She's not going to just settle for Walder Frey by any means. And where are the Boltons? They're all cozied up in Winterfell, which is her home. And possibly there's someone else there that she might be interested in wreaking some vengeance on. So, yeah, I think Bolton's, Winterfell, northwards. That's where we're heading.
Yeah, it's a good rabbit hole to go down. That's certainly what I've been doing the last few days, writing these notes out. Like you say, once the Freys are gone, or if they're ever gone, you can look for Lannisters. You could go to Castle Rock or King's Landing, even if you really want to go and see Cersei. That pales in comparison, I think, to especially, yes, what you said about Roose, but also, well, she hears Theon's still alive. He's the first betrayer. He kind of brought down everything. If you want to trace it back, it's not exactly a long rope to trace back the Red Wedding to Theon taking Winterfell, and he's supposed to have killed 2 of her sons. So if she knows he's up there with Roose, which, like you say, she actually saw him murder her son, so that's the murder of half your family right there and in your house. And you might even hear that Arya is apparently marrying one of them. Now, I assume that Jaime is going to tell her that's not correct, but why would she be trusting Jaime at any point soon? So you never know. She might still be thinking of that. And depending on the timing, maybe she even hears Rickon's returning. We don't know how, in what order this stuff is going to come in. So that makes an interesting choice, because if she does hear that Rickon's up there, but she hasn't found Arya and Sansa, does she go up? Does she stay down? We don't know. It really depends. There's a lot of room for this kind of timing stuff. And like you say, maybe even that evil Jon Snow is going down south as well, and he's been resurrected. So we definitely don't want Rickon or Arya or the Winterfell in general to fall into his hands. So yes, northward, like you say, Lady Gwyn, I think that fits in a lot with George's kind of original thinking of her going up north, and well, that was above the wall, but still, we've already seen her probe the neck, like you said. So maybe she's starting to look at going up there and how to do that, and what she can collect on the way in terms of Rob's will and certain people, and Ned's bones, maybe even Hound Reed. And I did think that would all just be intent rather than reality, and she would actually just stay in the Riverlands because she's tied to them so thematically. But I do not think that anymore after doing these notes, and I've, like I say, gone down this rabbit hole for 2 days straight now.
And I wonder if by the end of the Winds of Winter, whatever path Stoneheart takes, are we going to see her end? I mean, is her story really going to go into the last book, or can we kind of bookend it by the ends of Winter? And could she die? If she is going to die in Winds, I would like to know from both of you how you see her going out. And this is a question inspired by our patrons B-Word and Corin Halfhand.
Okay, so it's a multi-part question. So I think that she carries on into the next novel, especially since we're talking about this Frey revenge arc, possibly taking up all or most of Winds of Winter. She needs her Boltons, and however that happens, it may not come in this book specifically, but we cited an interview that George gave to the Chinese Esquire magazine in our current episode, wherein he was talking about show differences, which is one of his favorite drums to beat, and Lady Stoneheart is a great example. He seems to have said that Lady Stoneheart will be important to the rest of the story. So given that it was in a Chinese magazine, that could be an odd translation, so make of it what you will, but I found it interesting. I thought, this could be him really saying that she's going to be there throughout, or through most of, through Dream of Springs.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. As much as she could easily be like the flag bearer for the theme message of Winds, it's supposed to be the darkest book, and it's going to have a lot of people dying and probably a lot of people coming back to life. She definitely fits into Winds more than Dream, but I think all these things that we're talking about, her maybe going north and maybe finding one of her children, or what she's going to be doing with John, that's probably too much to fit into the one book. Now, again, if you'd asked me before I started doing these notes and getting all these Northern ideas, I might have said different, but I do not now.
Okay, so it was Arya as Nymeria who once pulled her mother Catelyn dead from the river in a storm of swords to begin this dark Stoneheart cycle. Nymeria is currently in the Riverlands with an expanded wolf pack, and I sometimes feel that Arya and Stoneheart have unfinished business given the thematic similarities in their stories regarding revenge, and perhaps one is going to take revenge and perhaps the other could end up turning away from revenge and becoming a more wholesome person. So could the two ever meet again, including Arya as Nymeria with her wolf dreams? And I just want to say as an aside that our patron Raymond wondered if Sansa could be the one to kind of end Stoneheart, but I chose to focus on Arya because of those thematic similarities that I saw, and I thought that maybe the chances of Arya and Stoneheart are greater than Sansa and Stoneheart. But what do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I don't think I'm breaking the mold here to suggest that Arya could come back and give her mother the gift of mercy and kind of end what she began in the first place, and maybe free Catelyn from whatever hell the inhabiting this body is, but freeing her from vengeance at the same time, whilst also maybe delivering the best possible news in that one of her children is alive. Maybe she's been with Arya for a while, maybe Arya comes out of the shadows and the last thing that Catelyn ever knows is that one of her children has survived. That would still be a pretty good ending. Now, it might be a bit too much to hope for that Arya observes enough to learn that this kind of revenge obsession is a bad idea, but if she's with her for enough time, then who knows, it would definitely fit. And to be honest with me, it clicks in with what I've long been saying about Catelyn and Arya not being all that close in the beginning of the book. Catelyn is more linked to Sansa, whereas Arya is kind of a tomboy, so she's more with Ned and she likes John. Obviously, she leaves with Ned. So I don't think we even ever see Catelyn and Arya interact. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I definitely don't remember that. So they need this kind of cap to their relationship, especially when Arya was so close to returning to her mother in Stormont. They've had that kind of emotional link from Arya just feeling so close to the Red Wedding and everything that happens. So that would be very, very fitting, given that she's so tied heavily to the Riverlands. And Also, it would be somewhat funny if the end of Catelyn is being killed by a blade that Jon Snow had built. That'd be great.
Yes, it would. I think Arya, yes, but in the north, I think there's something important about Catelyn Tully. She became a she-wolf in the end. In A Game of Thrones, she tells herself, "You must be a Stark for true now, like your son." And I truly believe, talked about it in our Catelyn episode years ago, that in the end, she got there. So I actually believe it would be true mercy from Arya, and maybe seeing what her mother has become might even be a catalyst for healing in her, at the end there. So yeah, definitely Arya.
Yes, it's something. There's something I can kind of waffle on about, and I know, boy, you've got a tough job of keeping us all on task here. But I can never get past the idea of all three Stark women reuniting in the Riverlands. It's kind of, in my mind, I call it this kind of Pathfinder idea, because both girls have been following Catelyn's footsteps throughout the series. With Sansa at the Eyrie and trying to get to Riverrun, and she goes to the inn where where Catelyn met Tyrion and everything. And they've both shared the struggle. They've had this really mirrored storyline of both trying to get home, as Catelyn once did, and they've also both taken half of her name. So it'd be incredible to see them come back together and maybe bring a little bit of true Catelyn back before the end. Now, it's incredibly unlikely on Sansa's part, although it is possible for her still to get through to the Riverlands. But as we've said before, maybe moving the location north solves that. Maybe this all happens in the north and you've got a lot more time and access. And very, very quickly, because I can't resist, but whilst talking about Sansa, I want to mention an idea that's lodged in my head about Stoneheart meeting Littlefinger or Peter Baelish again. And okay, Sansa is more likely, and she deserves to be the one to bring him down in Winterfell. I've always thought that. But I can't deny how much joy I would get from Stoneheart being involved in his death in some way. If she learns what he has done from Sansa, of everything Sansa knows, well, okay, we think Frey's a vengeance for Robb. Well, Littlefinger dying would be vengeance for everybody, for everything that's happened. So that would be a great way for him to die, to snap every illusion and lie out of him before he dies. Everything he wanted is in front of him, and it's actually his death. So that'd be a perfect conclusion to his horrible little arc that he is.
Yeah, I think so. I love that. I think that is one bit of vengeance that we could all feel good about.
I would certainly fist pump if Littlefinger got roasted on a spit. I wouldn't feel guilty about that one.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to our final question. All this Stoneheart conversation has me chomping at the bit for the Winds of Winter. I'm sure it's the same with all you guys. To me, the show leaving her out gives book readers something fresh to look forward to. So I want to know, were HBO and the show right or wrong to leave out Stoneheart? What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Well, I just think it was a missed opportunity. Have any of you guys seen the video of Johannes Hauker Johannesson, the actor that played Lem Lemoncloak, doing Lem's merit dialogue? And if you haven't, here we are on YouTube. When this stream is over in a few minutes, Google Lem Lemoncloak or search for Lem Lemoncloak on YouTube and watch it. It's a couple minutes long. Amazing. They had, the cast, some small adjustments. They could have included one of the most powerful and gut-wrenching narrative threads in the saga. And also, for what it's worth, made that Brotherhood journey to the north, which was kind of weird. And they seemed just like this kind of, I don't know, it was a enfeebled version of whatever their arc is going to be. Would have made all of that make a lot more sense. So to me, it would have been an improvement. But hey, I know there are reasons why they do these things. So.
Yeah, I think George is probably pretty glad that they did. Hence his recent building up of her, like we mentioned earlier, because as you said, Yoke Boy, the show gives us the bare bones of what to expect from each of the Stark kids. We basically know the big plot points for all of them, but we've got no idea about Catelyn, so she remains one of his biggest pulls, because he does relish the chance to still surprise us, given that so much of his story has gone kind of out of his reach. As for whether it was best for the show, I think, yeah, we can all agree it would be better if they had. But I can see some arguments of why they didn't. Spacing mainly is because the Riverlands just disappeared for a while, and we wouldn't have the build-up of rumor. But it is doable. They definitely could have. And where it would have been best is a knock-on effect of having to give more focus to Beric's plight, because we need a bit more focus on him to give his life to Catelyn, and then more focus inherently on Jon's own resurrection, which was definitely a flaw in how that wasn't focused on. I think all that does kind of flow quite well into what the overall purpose of Stoneheart is in the books as well. It's more than killing Freys. I think she does have something to teach us about reanimation, the nature of it, and the how and the why, and probably what it does to Jon, because he's one of the biggest characters. It's a warning, perhaps. Overall, I think she's probably just the main vehicle to bring the magical side of things to central Westeros and drag some of those elements up north. I know we didn't have time in the end to talk about what she would be doing with Jon, but I think it is going to be very, very important.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you so much, Joe, for joining us today. This is your second Streams of Winter, and
Honor.
You've done brilliantly as ever.
Thank you.
So I hear you two are doing a live stream for History of Westeros. Do you want to give us the information for that, Joe?
Yeah, it's our normal wrap-up episode because we've just finished Feast, so it'll be the usual. I don't envy Aziz for having to structure it, because we normally just go through the POVs, and there's loads more this time, so I'm not sure how we'll be doing it. But we'll be talking about what happens. Like you say, Lady Gwyn will be there, and Aziz, and I'm assuming Nina as well, hopefully. I think it is 8. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure you all know the time to be there because you'll follow them along.
8, yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So looking forward to that. That'll be a lot of fun, as always.
And how's the Isle of Faces podcast, which you are the main presenter? How's that going?
Yeah, like we say, so we've just finished Feast, so we get a little bit of a gap now until we move on to Dance, which gives me some time to actually deliver on the Patreon episode of reading out my Storm's End chapter from the Castles book that I did, because our lovely patrons have been very patient in me delaying that. And we're also going to have a little bonus kind of video episode, if I can get our camera working, because, well, I'll show you here. You might be able to see it, you might not on the camera, but I got this 3D model thing of Winterfell for my 30th birthday.
Podcasters, Joe's holding up the 3D model. Is that Winterfell?
Yeah. It is Winterfell, so I'm going to kind of do a video walking tour of this Winterfell, so we'll see how that goes. So that'll
it reminds me of the beginning of the Game of Thrones show, where it's like a pop-up book.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, it's like foldy paper model. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
So we'll have a look at that.
Fantastic.
Okay, fantastic. Lady Gwyn, why don't you announce our next live stream? We're likely to go every other week, guys, for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
And so every other week, 2 weeks, what's the arrangement?
Well, in 2 weeks, which will be Labor Day weekend, we're actually going to be doing it on Sunday in the same time slot that Valerie Regis usually takes place, 3:00 on the Sunday, September 6th. We'll be talking about Cersei with Mikhail Schick from Vassals of Kingsgrave. You may know her as Inca's Reign on Twitter. We are very excited. We changed it to Sunday so that we could have her be on with us. And Cersei is going to be the main topic in our new episode, which the patron rollout starts on Monday.
This is the Winds of Winter primer. This is the 4th part now, and the focus is on King's Landing. So it's obviously a lot of Cersei, but there's a lot of smaller loose threads, the Kingsguard, the Small Council. We will arrange things so you don't have to do a full reread in Times for Winds. We'll recap all those loose threads and keep you all informed. That's what we're going to do. The patron rollout, we're aiming for Monday.
Looking forward to it. So we've got a busy weekend But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. Thanks to people who are watching this in the future or listening to the podcast version. Appreciate
And
it.
I want to say a huge shout out to our moderators in the chat who keep things clean and ticking over. Thanks to all of you. It means a lot to us that you step up and do that job for us. And thanks to all our patrons. And if you want to be a patron of the show, there's lots of benefits. And of course, it really helps us. So head over to Radio Westeros on patreon.com and find us there and be a patron if you want to. And so thank you all for tuning in today. And for the rest of the weekend, have a good one. Goodbye.
Bye for now.